Jesus reveals to her who he is. She's confronted with the gospel, with the law. She's confronted with her need of Christ. She meets Christ. She encounters Christ. She believes. And what happens? She leaves in joyful shock. She goes back to the place of her rejection, back to the town of her shame. But she goes back with something that she didn't come out with. How can you draw that conclusion? Because she came out and worked to conceal her shame and her past. She leaves the jar, emblematic of her isolation, returns back into the place of her shame, and she now begins to broadcast, come and see the one who's told me everything I ever did. Come and see who he is. Her shame is gone. That which she worked to conceal, she now broadcasts as testimony. What she sought to conceal from Jesus, what she sought to avoid by coming to the well at noon, to avoid others because of her shame, she now unashamedly runs back to her town and proclaims, come, see a man who told me all I ever did. Her encounter with Jesus caused her to leave behind her jar of shame. And what she concealed, she was no longer fearful of. Her brokenness no longer held her captive. Her brokenness is now her testimony. You see, the gospel does that. The gospel confronts us with our past, shows us the love of God. It takes our past, it confronts it, and then it turns it into a testimony of joy. Is that not what we rejoice with when we hear the testimonies of baptism on Sunday morning? People who courageously step up before many people who they do not know and say, I once was this. This was my shame. This is who I was. But I stand before you joyfully to say this shame no longer belongs to me. Jesus took the jar of my shame. He drank the jar of my shame to the very last drop on the cross. My shame is his. He took it away, and instead he gave me his righteousness and joy. So I stand here to proclaim to you, I no longer am under the bondage of brokenness, but under the newness of life. You see, that is what the gospel does. It takes our fears and our brokenness, and it transforms it into joy in Christ. It unshackles us from our past. It unshackles us from our shame.